Okay. Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 35 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I am your host, Melissa Whitecross, coming to you live from Johannesburg. All of our shows are recorded and available on YouTube, so if you miss out because of load shedding, you can always catch up later. This past weekend, we celebrated World Migratory Bird Day, and tonight we will be joined by a phenomenal team of conservationists working together beyond borders to protect and conserve our migratory birds of the East Atlantic Flyway. But before we get to the show, just a reminder that you can communicate with us using the chat and the Q&A feeds in Zoom or the comment feed on Facebook Live, and we'll be sure to answer all your questions at the end of tonight's webinar. We are on all major social media channels, and you can use the hashtag #ConservationConversations to let us know what you think of tonight's show. And thanks as always for the generous contributions towards our webinars, which help to keep these shows free for all to learn and enjoy. Visit the Cricket page or EFT BirdLife South Africa directly and use the reference webinars with your name. And talking of supporting our webinars, our donations competition is back. Thanks to the generosity of Peter and Irene Ginn, we can again offer a copy of the Ultimate Companion for Birding in Southern Africa to not just one, but two of our generous donors during the months of October and November. Please make sure to donate via Quicket using the link in the chat or scanning the code on screen now to enter. This book is a must-have for all South African birders, so do please enter and support us. We're also starting to prepare for BirdLife South Africa's next major flock event, which will take place at the Wilderness Hotel from 24 to 28 May 2023. There'll be lots of exciting birding on offer and the biannual Learn About Birds event, with both a science and a layman's lab taking place. You don't need to be a hardcore ornithologist to enjoy this. The layman's lab is exactly like the Conservation Conversations webinar series. BirdLife South Africa's AGM will also be taking place on the Saturday with a luncheon after the meeting. So be sure to visit our website to find out more. And another exciting upcoming event is our birding weekend in collaboration with Women for Wild in Mthunzini, KZN. And that is undoubtedly one of my favorite birding spots in the country. Women for Wild is a collective of nature-loving, curious and adventurous women that undertake trips all over the country. We've partnered together and are taking 12 women down to the forests, mangroves, beaches, and estuaries of Zululand to enjoy the avian delights on offer. The trip will be guided by two of BirdLife South Africa's female community bird guides and is open to women of any birding level, from the absolute novices right through to the seasoned experts. Join us from 2 to 5 February 2023 by booking your spot. You can email womanforwild@gmail.com and please note the spelling of Woman for Wild. But on to tonight's main event. We are joined by some of Southern Africa's most formidable conservationists this evening, who are all present and all represent a partnership that is growing in strength and impact along the East Atlantic Flyway. The BirdLife Partnership has established the East Atlantic Flyway Initiative, or EFI as it's known, to facilitate the monitoring of birds and sites, identify conservation priorities, and increase capacity for conservation along the flyway to halt the decline of these incredible long-distance travelers. Joining us tonight will be Bronwyn Maree, BirdLife South Africa's very own EFI project manager, Ian Barber, the senior Flyways program officer from the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, Swithin Kashulwe, project assistant at BirdWatch Zambia, Julia Pierini, the CEO of Birdlife Zimbabwe, and Mpho Williart, Conservation Officer of Species Monitoring at BirdLife Botswana. Welcome to all of you. I'm going to hand over to Bronwyn to kick things off tonight, and it is great to have you on the show.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Can you just confirm I've got the right screen up?
You do. Go for it, Bron.
Fantastic. Good evening, everyone from all around the world. Tonight, we look forward to an action-packed edition of Conservation Conversations, as we have a whirlwind tour of some of the most incredible conservation being undertaken on the East Atlantic Flyway by a number of our BirdLife partners, who I have the absolute pleasure of working with on a daily basis. The East Atlantic Flyway is vast and requires a number of interventions to ensure the safe passage and conservation of our migratory birds. To achieve this, we focus efforts on species monitoring and research, habitat restoration and protection, policy and advocacy, and of course, education and sustainable livelihood interventions for people. Tonight, we will hear from a number of our key collaborators. As Melissa's already mentioned, we have Ian from the RSPB. The RSPB very kindly supports my position. Ian will provide a brief background into Mpho and highlight some of the work along the flyway. Next up will be myself, and I will share an example of a species monitoring project in South Africa. Swithin will take the floor following myself and will share an exceptional habitat restoration project that's been happening in Zambia. Then Julia Pierini, our CEO from BirdLife Zimbabwe, who is our most animated member of this evening, I think you can see from both of her pictures. She'll outline the importance of policy and advocacy within the region. And lastly, but certainly not least, is Mpho, the conservation officer from BirdLife Botswana, who will run us through one of the longest species monitoring projects along the flyway. Then we'll open up for a round of questions. Although many of the projects highlighted tonight are located in specific countries for specific areas or specific species, the BirdLife partners within the region are working together on a number of projects across country borders. These landscape scale projects will be a topic for a future evening. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ian to take us away.
Okay, thank you very much, Bronwyn, and good evening to everybody. I will start to share my screen. Hopefully get this right. And presentation mode. How does that look to everybody? Is that good?
You just need to switch the display setting in so you can see all your notes. So Ian is our only
the other way around. Okay.
Export from the northern part of the flyway while he's just fixing that. There we go. That's perfect.
Is that
Thanks,
better?
Ian. Yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
Okay. So good evening again. Yes, Ian Barber. I work for the RSPB based here in the UK, and I'm going to talk about the global migration highway from Iceland to South Africa. So bird migration is a topic that's fascinated people from the earliest times, really. And the arrivals and departures of different species mark the seasons, heralding spring and autumn, and provide a calendar long before anything better was available. And migration has repeatedly prompted familiar questions such as where do birds go or come from, why do they migrate, how do they migrate, and where do they travel to? And with the advent of research and science over the years and centuries and decades, the understanding of this phenomenon is constantly improving. There are several highways of migration have been identified across the globe, and we're tonight going to talk about the East Atlantic Flyway. And you can see there in the map on the left hand side there, that's the outline of the flyway, and it stretches right from Greenland and Arctic Russia in the north through Europe and the Mediterranean, West Africa, and down where most of you are viewing from this evening into Southern Africa and South Africa right at its tip. And just to explain the colours on the map, so the green countries are those where there is an existing BirdLife partner. The yellow countries, such as Namibia and Angola, they're countries where there isn't yet a BirdLife partner, but BirdLife International have plans to have a partner there in the not too distant future, if possible. And then the orange countries are those where there isn't a partner, and it's probably going to be a more of a long-term decision or process to get those partners on board. So places like Algeria, Mali, DRC, etc. So that's the flyway as it is. And as I say, it's one of 8 major flyways across the globe, and the birds that use this particular flyway are known as the Afropalearctic migrants. And here in Western Europe and the UK particularly, we're at the heart of the flyway because a lot of birds that use the flyway come to Europe as either in the summer or winter and also on passage. So almost throughout the year, we're getting birds that use the flyway. So it's really important to us here in Europe. There's something like 1 to 1.2 billion water birds use the flyway, and anything in excess of 2.5 billion passerines or land birds use the East Atlantic Flyway. So it's a hugely important flyway. And over the last few decades or more, scientific studies have showed that many Afropalearctic migrants are in rapid decline, unfortunately. What they need is a chain of suitable sites along the flyway, so to act as like service stations. So if you think of the flyway as a motorway, when we're driving along, we need somewhere to stop, to refuel, to stretch our legs, maybe to rest. And it's just the same for birds as they're flying along the flyway. They need these sites to help them get along. And traditional site-based conservation can help them. And most BirdLife partners do this, and conservation organisations do this through what we call the important bird and biodiversity areas, key biodiversity areas, national parks, etc. And we're all familiar with those. But it's going to take more than just conserving sites to protect them. What we need is the connectivity between these critical sites. So we need to be looking more at a landscape scale in order to protect these birds. And here at RSPB, our strategy involves the conservation of key sites, and we're targeting 50 key sites along this flyway to conserve, and 2 important landscapes we're looking at. And we're looking at identifying those areas at the moment, and we'll be working with our partners to try and conserve those sites. So moving to the BirdLife East Atlantic Flyway Initiative, or EFI as it's known. This was initiated in 2015, and largely with those 6 organisations are represented there on the left, with the RSPB and the Dutch partner VBN leading the establishment of a task force, which involved the BirdLife partners from Ghana, South Africa and Tunisia, as well as BirdLife itself. Now, this was started in 2015, and the objectives were to identify and address priority threats to migratory birds, strengthen the capacity of BirdLife partners along the flyway, and promote and implement BirdLife's local to global conservation approach. And that task force was in existence until this year. It served for 6 years, and there are about 38 BirdLife partners along the route of the 75 that are along the flyway were part of the ever increasing size of that network. But this year, 2022, it's decided to expand that into more of a coordination group. And at the moment, we have 11 partners that are at the core of that, and we're hoping that will increase as we go through the years. One flyway, 6 flagship species. In order to tell the story of the hundreds of species that use the migrate along the flyway, it was decided to choose these 6 species to act as flagships and representations of the other species that are there. So there are land birds and water birds. And this is especially beneficial for when we talk about communications. And we're going to look at some of these species in the different talks that you'll hear this evening. Research to guide conservation. So organisations have been involved in research over the years. And one of the most important is the annual International Wetland Census, which occurs along the flyway. And that's coordinated by Wetlands International. And this tells us where the most important coastal wetlands are located. And many of the BirdLife partners coordinate their national accounts each year. So they're very at the centre of this important study. Moving on to some of the passerines, geolocators have been used on small passerines such as pied flycatchers, and this has allowed us to locate their favourite wintering homes. And in this particular case, it was the Ghanaian forests of West Africa. And then lastly, larger satellite tags have been carried by some of the larger land birds. So here in the UK, the British Trust for Ornithology have been tagging cuckoos, and the RSPB ourselves, we've been looking at turtle doves. And again, that's allowed us to find out where they go on their migratory routes, what passage they take, and where they eventually end up. And as again, the turtle dove in this particular case favours West Africa as its for its wintering grounds. I'm now going to look at 4 conservation projects and programs that we're involved in at RSPB. There are many more that are ongoing, but I've chosen 4 that represent some of the work we're doing along the flyway. And you'll notice in the map on the right-hand side, there'll be a red arrow to indicate where we're actually looking at. So we're going to start off at the north. We're going to go to Iceland and the Icelandic Grasslands. And these are hugely important for not just for the ducks and geese that winter in Europe, but also breeding waders, which are a very important group of birds that occur in Europe and the UK particularly. And they use these stopover sites in Iceland to progress further along to Greenland and northeast Canada to breed, but a lot of them stay in Iceland and they breed on these lowland grasslands. And they support significant numbers of breeding waders. And I'll just bring up a few here. So you can see that the figures in brackets are the percentage of the global breeding population that breed in these Icelandic grasslands. So huge numbers. So black-tailed godwits, 10% of the global breeding population breed in Iceland. And as we move further down, Dunlin 16%, redshank 19%. Large numbers there. And then finally, things like Wimbrel, 40% of their global breeding population breed in Iceland. And amazingly, the golden plover, over half of all golden plovers breed in Iceland on these grasslands. So it's hugely important grassland areas. And these grasslands are peat rich, but they're drying out, unfortunately. As the natural northward march of the tree line extends, an extension of the boreal biomes continues as a result of climate change. These grasslands are getting smaller and smaller. And this is not helped by the recent government afforestation policy, which unfortunately includes large areas of these lowland grasslands are going to be reforested. And that's part of the government plan, which is not going to help in any way. But you might think, well, it's tempting to say, well, we need to plant more trees, which is true, we do. But this may cause, if they're planted in these peatland-rich grasslands, this may actually cause a release of carbon, as well as destroying these critical habitats. So what we're doing, we're helping the BirdLife partner in Iceland, Fuglavern, hopefully I've pronounced that correctly, and we're helping them to respond to their government's policy so that they can respond in a positive way to try and avoid a lot of reforestation of these areas. But we're also helping them access funding through the EU LIFE funding to restore degraded peatlands and to capture some of this carbon. So that's one of the areas where we're working. Moving a bit further down the flyway to Portugal and the Tagus Estuary. And again, this is another hugely important site for waders, particularly along the flyway. It's 3,400 kilometers squared, and it's important in not only in a Portuguese context, but in a European and international context, because it has a European designation, a special protected area, and also an international designation. It's a Ramsar site. And in 2021, the RSPB did a study on looking at all the data that was available from ringed birds and satellite tag birds, and you can see the information there on the left for the Dunlin and on the right for the bar-tailed godwit. And you can see that this site, you can see the little red dot there in Portugal, that's the Tagus Estuary, and this site was used by these birds from 30 different countries. So they use the birds come from the north, travel through the Tagus and head south into West Africa and reverse. When they migrate back north, they use the Tagus on the way back as well. So it's hugely important in an international context with a huge number of birds using this site from all over Europe and West Africa. But again, unfortunately, it's not a site that's well protected. The Portuguese government in 2019 announced that they were going to construct a second airport for Lisbon, and they chose adjacent to the Tagus Estuary to build this airport. And on the map on the left, the green boundary is the special protection area, which is the European designation, and that includes not just the estuary but areas of rice fields and wet grasslands that extend into the countryside there. The brown area is the intertidal mudflats. The red dots are the known roosting sites for a lot of waders. But unfortunately, the EIA, the environmental impact assessment that accompanied this project, was flawed in many, many ways. It didn't take into account the disturbance that would occur from the airport, and so we, with other people, we did a study on what that disturbance might be. And as you can see, the runway was oriented north-south, so that as the planes take off and land, they'll be coming directly over the Tagus Estuary, and those patches of those cones of colour indicate the decibel level of the planes as they take off. And as you can see, the decibel level from between 55 and 65 decibels is going to impact a huge area of that estuary. But they also didn't take into account the international impact of this decision to build this site, and that was one of the things that we were particularly interested in. So in 2020, the court case started, and this was taken out by SPEA, which is the BirdLife partner in Portugal, and along with other NGOs in Portugal, they've started a court case to try and get this airport stopped. And as I say, in 2021, the RSPB started coordinating partner response. The Dutch partner in VBN in the Netherlands, they started a petition, and that was signed by over 40,000 people opposing the construction of this airport. And there was also the BirdLife partners themselves wrote letters and sent videos to the Portuguese government saying that the airport, explaining why the estuary was so important and what an impact it would have on their birds in their countries. And the RSPB has been coordinating this partner response. And as I say, in 2021, we produced a research report for the court case, highlighting how important this site is, with those 30 plus birds from 30 plus countries visiting the area. And so far it's looking quite good, because in this year, the Portuguese public prosecutor actually said, and I quote, "The Portuguese government has failed to properly consider the devastating impacts of the future Montejo airport on the Tagus Estuary," Montejo being that area where that plane is on the map, right at the boundary of the SPA. So the public prosecutor has said that this is not a good idea to put the airport here. So we're reasonably confident that this airport at the current location will be turned down. But unfortunately, the Portuguese government have indicated that they are absolutely determined to have a new airport for Lisbon. So they're likely to come back with a revised site somewhere else, but it still will have, no doubt, have an impact on the Tagus Estuary. So we may win this particular battle, but we certainly haven't won the war, and that's one to watch, unfortunately. Moving further down to the west coast in West Africa, and a bird that is particularly crucial in the UK context. This is one of our fastest declining breeding birds. And in the UK, this bird, the turtle dove, has declined by 98% over the last 50 years. So you go back to the 1970s, and for every 100 birds that were breeding in the UK in the 1970s, we only have 2 left in the UK breeding, so 98% decline. So it's a bird that we've been working on for several years, and in 2012 we started Operation Turtle Dove, and this was through the habitat creation on our own reserves, through monitoring and research throughout the UK. We could try and determine what the issues were with this particular bird. We've launched turtle dove friendly zones, whereby we create where we advise farmers, landowners and communities on how to create turtle dove friendly areas for nesting and feeding. But unfortunately, in order to save this bird, it's not just going to be done on its breeding areas in Europe, it's also going to be in its wintering areas. And through the work that I mentioned earlier about tagging this particular bird, we know that this bird ends up in wintering in the likes of Mauritania and Senegal and Mali. And so we have to look at these areas as well as to where we can start to protect it in its wintering areas. So we've tagged birds within Senegal as well, and that's providing information about where the bird roosts and forages. And so we've got a better picture of where it goes. And from the information we've gathered to date, about 54% of the year it's on its wintering grounds, so just 46% on its breeding grounds. And in its wintering grounds, these birds are over an area of something like 44,000 square kilometres. So again, that highlights the fact that you can't protect a lot of our land migrants by looking at individual sites. It has to be over a landscape scale, because these birds migrate over a huge area. But it's allowed us to look and work with our partners on and start to look at what we need to do to protect this bird in its wintering areas. And we've been working with the BirdLife partner in Senegal, NCD, looking at controlling some of the threats and the extension of land use and how we might protect this bird. And that's an ongoing project that will be for many years. Moving a bit closer to home, where many of you are situated this evening, the Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, or CASA TFCA. This is an area, as you can see, which covers part of Zambia, Angola, Namibia, Botswana and Zimbabwe. It's one of several transfrontier conservation areas, but it's the largest that's been so far been designated. It's over 500,000 kilometres squared, and it was established in 2011. And within that area, it supports around 3 million people and is home to many of the famous tourist destinations in southern Africa that many of you will be familiar with. So places like Chobe National Park, Hwange National Park, Kafue National Park, Vic Falls, etc. So it's hugely important for people and tourism, but it's also important for biodiversity. So there are 36 formally protected areas in this area, in this transfrontier conservation area. There are over 3,000 plant species, a huge number of threatened mammals, including lions, cheetahs, African wild dogs, etc. Over 600 bird species, 128 reptiles, 50 amphibians, and the list just goes on and on. And I think you get the picture. It's hugely important, not just for people, but also for biodiversity. And when this area was established, one of the key objectives of CASA was to sustainably manage the CASA ecosystem based on best conservation and tourism models for the socio-economic well-being of the communities. So in other words, conservation of the ecosystems, but bearing in mind so that the communities also benefit. And just recently, the UK government has launched their key biodiversity landscape fund, BLF, and this is a pot of £100 million, which is for 6 globally threatened landscape hotspots, and one of those hotspots is this CASA TFCA. And so we ourselves, RSPB, the BirdLife partners in the region, and BirdLife International itself, have formed part of a consortium which is bidding for the £15 million budget that is available for this CASA TFCA, and it will be a project over 7 years. We've been working for a long while now to develop this proposal, and as I say, it's a consortium of many different partners, not just BirdLife partners. But within this proposal, we'll be looking at community livelihoods, biodiversity, economy, particularly aviatourism, which BirdLife South Africa's specialist is specialising in. Protected area management, so the IBAs, KBAs I mentioned earlier, wildlife crime, wildlife corridors, land use planning, climate change, etc. So these will all form part of the proposal. And the deadline for that proposal for the £15 million is actually tomorrow. So we've all been working quite hard on that over the last few weeks to get that proposal pulled together. So there's some of the areas that the RSPB is involved in along the flyway. That's conservation on the ground, if you like, but we also are working within the policy sphere, and I know Julie is going to talk about this a bit later, but within RSPB we have our own policy and advocacy team, and they work and help alongside the East Atlantic Flyway initiative to look at some of the policy conventions that are globally there. So the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on Migratory Species at the international level, if you like, and then moving further down at the regional level, there's African Eurasian Migratory Land Bird Action Plan, bit of a mouthful. There's the African Eurasian Migratory Water Birds Convention. And then at a sort of smaller level, there's the Arctic Migratory Birds Initiative and the Wadden-Sea Flyway Initiative. And the RSPB is engaging with all of these, and we have people going to all of these conventions and working with governments and with other organisations to try and get a better outcome for migratory birds. And then finally, there are several species action plans, single and multi-species action plans, and the RSPB again has been engaging with those, particularly the turtle dove one, which we are instrumental in developing. So we're doing a lot along the flyway and working, I must emphasise, with our partners, BirdLife Partners and others. So that's my talk over. So I'll hand back to Bronwyn, who can introduce the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ian. I think it's very clear from Ian's presentation of setting the scene that flyway conservation is complicated, and it's made up of a number of smaller initiatives such as the water bird counts, which I'm sure many of you tuned in tonight have partaken in before. And if you haven't, please reach out. We can connect you with some of the sites, all the way to the flyway sort of landscape approach that was mentioned in the CASA TFCA. So Ian, you're handing back to me. I'm going to be taking the floor for the next one. Right, so as we heard from Ian, there are 6 flagship species within the East Atlantic Flyway, and species conservation forms one of the pillars within the East Atlantic Flyway initiative. By establishing species monitoring and research of threatened and common bird species, we can better understand the trends of these species and the threats to these species. And if we're able to impact these threats and reduce these threats, the resilience of the population along the flyway can improve. So I'm going to take us through one of the projects that BirdLife South Africa has implemented using or with the charismatic and well-known migrant, the European roller, so the bird that's slightly larger on your right-hand side. They should be returning to our part of the world in roughly a month's time. Normally around mid-November we start to see them. There has been a large amount of work focused on their breeding areas in the north, but very little that's been done on their overwintering sites in southern Africa. The European roller is a medium-sized, long-distance migrant which migrates from Eurasia to Africa. It has different populations with different migratory routes and wintering grounds which partly overlap. There are 2 subspecies which occur in southern Africa. One migrates from Asia and the other from Europe, but both of which are known to occur in South Africa. The Asian population is thought to be the dominant species within the region, and European rollers are generally solitary and monogamous, although they do form pairs. I'm sure many of you have also seen rollers perching on trees where they often hunt by day, preying on insects, and interestingly enough, they can eat up to 25 insects per day. Their threat status is considered to be least concern, despite the knowledge that the populations have been in decline since the 1970s. There's also more recently been several declines noted at their breeding sites. Threats to the species include being hunted while on migration, as well as the reduced insect availability due to the increased use of pesticides, as well as the loss of breeding areas, including trees, due to agricultural expansion. Consequently, a flyway action plan for the European roller was adopted in 2017. A number of gaps were highlighted in this action plan, and these include a lack of information of the stopover sites and the migration strategy of the eastern populations. That's the one which comes down to South Africa, the one which is largely dominant. a lack of monitoring of the species at the overwintering grounds, and a lack of understanding of the habitat use of European rollers along the migration routes, as well as down south in the overwintering sites. In particular, the Asian breeding population has yet to be studied in detail. There's limited tracking data and ring recoveries, and as such, more data is required to clarify the subspecies migration route. To start to address some of these gaps, we established a monitoring program with an easy-to-use protocol, which was developed with many donations by BirdLife's. The European Roller Monitoring Project was initiated in 2021, starting in the Kruger National Park and 2 private reserves in KwaZulu-Natal. If you look at the animation on the screen, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see these locations were chosen as they occur at the areas of highest reporting rates for the species. So that map's just sort of a smooth example of reporting rates. So you'll see they're all up in the northern part of the country. So data is collected along specific transects throughout a reserve and not across the entire reserve. So these transects are repeated on a yearly basis so that we can get a constant data for that specific area, which can be extrapolated across the reserve and obviously across the country once we start to get more than one sites in the monitoring program. So in future, we hope to include sites outside of protected areas and work further up the flyway, as well as tracking these birds to obtain information on their migration routes and the potential threats that are faced at these sites, much like Ian has showed with some of the species examples in his talk. So for each site we're monitoring, a number of transects are chosen, and these vary across a number of different types of habitats and throughout the reserve. So you'll see the example of Kruger National Park on the screen on the left-hand side. The yellow lines or bars that you see are the transects that have been chosen. These range between 1 and 10 kilometers in length, and ideally should be as straight as possible to avoid duplicating counts of birds. So here we're really aiming to understand the habitat use and the transects in the population over time. And observers will essentially drive in their cars slowly along the specific length of the transect, which each transect has a very detailed description accompanying it. And they can start on either end of the transect and essentially limit any disturbance to the birds. Where required, we've obtained permits either from the landowners or in the case of Kruger National Park from SANParks, our environmental authority of the area. The data which is collected is displayed on the screen. Essentially, there's subsets of data which is automatically collected within the BirdLife's app, and this includes your date and time and coordinates or location of the sighting seen. Then you have data which is manually entered by the observers into the app, and this includes which type of roller species is seen. So we ask that not only the European roller is recorded, but other rollers in the vicinity. The number of birds that are seen, the distance of the bird from the observer, and this can either be recorded in a distance band, so for example, 0 to 20 meters from the observer, or if there is a rangefinder available, you can get an exact location or exact distance for that bird from the observer, as well as the angle of the bird from the observer. So all of this data is brought together in the analysis. There's also a section to add additional information, such as notes on the weather, the transect name, the number of observers, or any other important information that the observer feels should be added in. It sounds like a lot of information, but essentially to record each roller sighting takes less than 10 seconds to complete the data entry. So if we start to take a look at the results of the first season, with obviously a big thank you to BirdLife South Africa's Science and Innovation team for assisting with their data analysis. Here is a map of the Southern Africa Bird Atlas Project, or the SABAP2 data, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, for South Africa, Lesotho, and Eswatini, which is indicating the reporting rates or the relative abundance of the European rollers. So again, you can see that the areas of high abundance are the areas where we've located our transects, which are the little dots in yellow that you can see on the screen. These transects were conducted with the help of honorary rangers, reserve research staff, and BirdLife South Africa staff. We completed 42 transects between November 2021 and February 2022. European rollers were frequently encountered, with birds being recorded on 30 of the 42 transects. On transects where there were birds seen, there was an average of 4 birds per transect. And as expected, many of the birds were recorded as individuals, except in one case where a group of 3 was noted. So then I'm just going to run through you these diagrams. Don't get too scared off by them. But if you take a look at the image on the left, it shows the geographic locations of the various roller species that we encountered. So if you can see, most of the birds are seen within Kruger National Park were European rollers. So the European rollers, the little blue dots near the bottom of the left-hand graph. And the sites that are in KwaZulu-Natal are the ones that are higher up in the graph. And there we can see a complete mix of the 3 species which were logged: European roller, purple roller, and lilac-breasted roller. And the image on the right just shows the number of encounters of each of these 3 species, with European rollers coming up around 120 times, so just short of 120 records across the 3 reserves that were done in 2021-22. The vast majority of the birds recorded were found perching, so they were likely hunting for insects, followed by flying, with very few records of birds actively feeding or on the ground. The highest density of birds were found closer to the observer, as shown in the figure on the screen. So the distance is on the bottom of the graph. So the distance from the observer from 0 to 200 meters was our detection distance. And then the density is found on the y-axis. This essentially is showing that the most effective detection distance for European rollers is surprisingly narrow, with most birds being detected within 50 meters of the transect line. But luckily, for anyone who's been to Kruger National Park and some of these other reserves, you'll know that European rollers are really easy to find. They're really charismatic, and they either appear on fence lines, on electrical lines, or on the top of trees. So essentially, this short project so far, the first European roller surveys, have shown that this was a great success. And the surveys are currently indicating a relatively healthy population in South Africa during this past summer. But there's still a lot of work that lies ahead to determine the factors which may influence the abundance, the population trends, the habitat preference, and the migration route of this very charismatic species. So we look forward to continuing to monitor the species this coming year on the same reserves, as well as expanding to several new privately owned reserves. And it is hoped that this will continue into a long-term project and that this vital information will be fed into the action plan for the species to aid in addressing many of the knowledge gaps which have been highlighted at the start of the presentation. We rely very heavily on individuals who are on the reserves, and so this is really a collaborative project to find out more information on the species. And so again, a huge big thank you must go to all those who've assisted, firstly with the donations that allowed us to develop the data collection protocol in BirdLife's, those who have assisted in data collection so far, and then to our science team, Alan and Adams, who have helped with the data analysis to date. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop there. And just before I hand over to Swithin from BirdWatch Zambia, I'd just like to remind you that you're very welcome to put your questions or chats into the Q&A and chat boxes throughout the talk, and we'll get to that as soon as we finish. So Swithin, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to share, let me just share my. Okay, good evening once more. So I'm Swithin Kashulwe. I'm the project, the Habitat Conservation Officer at BirdWatch Zambia. And I'm going to speak about our habitat conservation projects where we are currently focusing on invasive species control in Zambia's key biodiversity areas. So to start with, I'm just going to give a brief introduction about BirdWatch. So BirdWatch Zambia is a local environmental conservation organization whose objective is to promote the study, conservation, and general interest in birds and their habitats in the country. So BirdWatch Zambia is a partner to BirdLife, the only partner to BirdLife International in Zambia. And our main activities are centered on Zambia's 42 key biodiversity areas. And these activities are based on taking actions for species, particularly the globally threatened species, habitats, collecting data on habitats to make informed decisions, and also promoting the linkage between biodiversity conservation and people through awareness raising and environmental education in schools. I am now going to talk about the two projects that we currently have in the organization, which are looking at invasive species control. One of that project is on the Barber floodplain. So the Barber floodplain is located on the western part of the country, in the western province of Zambia. And the other one is Salvinia molesta control on the Lukanga swamp, which is located in the central part of the country. So you may wish to know that these two areas are designated Ramsar sites and key biodiversity areas. These areas support livelihoods of the local people who live around these areas. And these areas are important stopover sites for migratory birds, including the Mpho species. We've been able to record Mpho species through our routine monitoring of the wetlands. And so to go deep into the Salvinia molesta control on the Lukanga swamps, we attempted the manual control in 2013. So this was after the, this was when the Swedish government, the Danish government and Netherlands government put some funds together to fund environmental works in Zambia. So we initiated the manual control of the Salvinia molesta. Unfortunately, this initiative was unsustainable because, as you can see on the picture on the right, we have people in the water, and this water is deep at some point. So it called for some health and healthy concerns. So we did some research to see how well can we control this without putting people's lives at risk from diseases and safety risks. And in 2017, we applied for the Darwin Initiative funds, and the Darwin funded this project to initiate the biocontrol initiative using the weevil, which is called Cytoboga salviniae. This is the beetle that you are seeing on the right of the screen. So this beetle is not necessarily as you see it big, it's very small. I don't know, maybe some of you have seen how the small beetle in maize grains looks like. This is how also this weevil looks like. So we initiated this biocontrol in 2017. The project ran through from 2017 to 2021 last year. And the results from that project as follows. As you can see on your left, top left, the picture is how in 2017, one of the canals in Lukanga swamp in the area called Wire was infested with Salvinia molesta. And after the biocontrol intervention, in 2021, the picture you are seeing on the bottom left, it's how the canal now looks as a result of the biocontrol that was implemented on the Lukanga swamp. And on the right, what you are seeing is the graph, the trend lines. We predicted how Salvinia was going to look if no intervention was carried out on the Lukanga swamp. So you see from 2010 how the trend line was going, the blue line, how it was going. But due to the intervention, you see in 2020, when last the satellite image analysis was done, you find that there was reduced increase from how it was increasing from 2010 to 2017. So the rate and of infestation reduced a bit, which was a success. And we have started seeing migratory birds coming to this landscape, because when it was infested, we started recording less numbers of birds, especially the open water loving birds. But due to the intervention that was made during the biocontrol project, we've seen such birds coming back and numbers increasing. Unfortunately, this project came to an end in March last year, and we started looking for funds to continue with the project, because even if the project ended, we still had some portion of the swamp infested with Salvinia molesta. And there is still hope, because we've been talking to WWF and the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment, who are interested in seeing that this project continues and the wetland is restored to ensure that biodiversity is conserved on the landscape. So we are likely to continue this project this year with funding from Ministry of Green Economy through the through the EBA project, which is the ecosystem-based adaptation, and from WWF it's through the wetland restoration project, which where we're getting funds from to continue with the implementation of this project. I would like also to talk about the Mimosa pigra control on the Barossa land that have initiated this year. And this project is, of course, with support from WWF, who've funded this project so that we can control this invasive species. So this project will run from this year up to December next year. And we hope that we'll be able to secure more funds even after the project has ended. So in 2020, there was a mapping which was done by the International Crane Foundation and WWF, and they established that the Mimosa pigra had spread to approximately 10 hectares on the landscape. And this year again, BirdWatch together with the WWF conducted another mapping of the Mimosa pigra, to see how it has spread from the baseline in 2020. So we found that in 2022, this Mimosa pigra has spread to approximately 14 hectares. But the time we were mapping this, it was in the wet season, when it was when the wetland was still flooded. So we didn't reach other areas. But when we went back, that was in last month, we went to some areas which we did not reach, and we found that these 14 hectares that we recorded might be under figure which is below to the way it is spread on the wetland. But we will initiate this one. We will take the manual control. We will do this slash and burn because there has been talking about the chemical control, which is not sustainable because of the wetland. Maybe it might poison the aquatic organisms in the water. So the Zambia Environmental Management Agency has withdrawn the manual control of this, the chemical control of this invasive species. And it has been discovered that the spread of this mimosa has been attributed mainly to the variation in the hydrological regimes of the Barossa floodplain. And this is because people believe that the studies that have been conducted found that the construction of this, the Mount Kalabo Bridge, there is a road which has been constructed through the wetland, has altered the normal drainage of the flooding system or patterns of the wetland, which has resulted in Mimosa pigra being spread even to the areas which it didn't spread. Because if you were to visit this site, you will find that much of the infestation is along this road, which goes through Mongu to Kalabo, which is in the western part of the country as well. So BirdWatch together with WWF have initiated this project to manually control these invasive species so that we can conserve biodiversity and ensure that we reduce on the spread of these invasive species. And it is not only the Mimosa pigra and the Salvinia molesta. We've been looking at other invasive species that are in the country, which include the Limnobium, the Azolla, and water hyacinth. We're exploring how we can base also control these invasive species, because they have invaded most of the wetlands in the country. And we've also been talking to other partners who have shown interest in supporting the projects that we're undertaking to ensure that we restore the habitats. So we've been talking to African parks who have shown also interest in supporting the projects. This is the Salvinia molester control project, the biocontrol in the Kashulwe National Park along the Kashulwe River, which has also been infested. So we hope that these projects will continue so that we may restore the habitats and ensure that we conserve biodiversity in the country for the betterment of migratory species and other biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Swithin. I think it's great to see such innovative solutions and, not giving up. That's long haul projects that you're showing us, but there's been some really good results. So huge congratulations. I'm now going to hand over to our most charismatic person on tonight's show, Julia. I'm going to pass over to you from BirdLife Zimbabwe.
Good evening, everybody. After Bronwyn's introduction, I don't know what you're going to imagine. So, greetings from Zimbabwe. I am BirdLife, Julia Pierini, the CEO of BirdLife Zimbabwe. We are based in Harare, our offices, and I'm a little bit conscious of the time. And so I am just going to be taking you through very, very quickly, because it's a very complex conversation on our work on policy and advocacy, which we focused in this particular case on wetlands. So, and I will be explaining why we have, sorry, no, we're not moving.
You just need to pop it into sharing mode. Slideshow, Julia. There we go.
Okay, so BirdLife Zimbabwe, we are the BirdLife international partner in Zimbabwe. Pretty much the survival of birds and biodiversity in Zimbabwe for the enjoyment of future generations. Our focus is a lot also not only on species, but on habitats, on ecosystems, healthy ecosystems. We are in a very worrying place at a global level, but also in country level in terms of healthy ecosystems. And so this is my talk, a little bit cover about why we have sort of in the last 3 years put a lot of focus into policy work as well. So membership organizations, we've got a lot of enthusiastic members who are birders who collect data for us. Now I'm going backwards instead of going forwards. Harare, wetland city. So for those of you who have been to Harare, the capital city of Zimbabwe, it is a wetland. And many of you probably would not have ever noticed that, and because you see a lot of buildings, as you see in the photograph on the left, a lot of high-rise buildings, a lot of development. But in actual fact, the city was built on its headwater wetlands. So it's an upland plateau watershed area, very, very important grassland, wetland, very small wetland areas, very fragile areas, and the drainage areas of the rivers that we are known locally as the Gwibi catchment, the Munzi, the Manyami drainage area. And so we're sitting on top of our catchment areas, and our catchment dams flow downhill into our catchment dams of Lake Chibero and Lake Manyami, which are both Ramsar sites. The city also has 2 Ramsar sites within the city. So this is an interesting photograph that I got out of a desktop book on the urban development of Harare, and it's from our archives, our local archives, and you can see space. And when I ask people, what is that? They don't know. They can't imagine what that is. Well, that is grass, miles and miles of grass. So in 1892, before development, there was these headwater wetland grasslands. And in the higher areas, you had the Nyombo woodlands, the Masasas, Monondos, where we have our special species, Mpho species. So this was where Harare was developed. And if you come to us to visit us today, it's quite incredible. You will be amazed. So within the city, you have these spaces, these open spaces, grasslands. And this is the Montevideo Ramsar site within the middle of Harare is a model of our restored wetlands. So this area has been restored. So in our policy advocacy, we drive home the fact that wetlands can be restored. And this is our model of restoration. And it also involves a model where community around the wetlands are actually involved in the protection of the wetland. And there is a flay scout, protecting the wetland. And that is very critical to and a lot of education for schools goes on the wetland, very key. So why are we protecting the wetlands? So in terms of migratory species, so here I've included just a few migratory species, not only the ones from the East Flyway, but because we are celebrating World Migratory Bird Day, I thought I'd include a few others, and particularly, so striped crake is streaky-breasted bloodtail. There's a lot of potential in Zimbabwe, and we have tourism, people coming to see these birds in the rainy season, particularly in January and February in our flays, and because they are very special intra-African migrants, and in Harare very easy to see. So other birds include great-reed warblers, sedge warblers, great snipes. I put the African as well, so that we could look at how we differentiate them. Black cuckles, dwarf bittern, African crake. So these are some of the species that we find in Harare's wetlands. So protecting Harare's wetland is a contentious issue, as you can imagine. It's a growing city. We have a development plan for Zimbabwe called the National Strategic Development Plan, NDS1, and where we are trying to raise the standard of living of people in Zimbabwe through many economic difficulties. We have been, in economic distress for many years. And so these areas are sought after by developers and cultivators. So it is extremely challenging, but it's extremely important because it also sets the framework of what's happening around Zimbabwe as well. So not just Harare. So these exceptional biodiverse, seasonally inundated open grassland wetlands remained untouched until the last 10 years, where the population started to burgeon. We had a lot of rural to urban migration due to the economic challenges we continue to experience in Zimbabwe. And so the implications for biodiversity are enormous. And this is one of the challenges that we have, is in the protection of these areas, getting people to understand the importance of biodiversity, the importance of the birds, the migratory species. Why is biodiversity really important? So we are honing our skills in trying to get people to understand the importance of biodiversity. So it's a good training ground, and it's extremely challenging, as you can just imagine. And the other thing that we push very, very hard is that the wetlands are the primary water source for the capital as well. And so, trying to hook everybody into protecting the wetlands, not only for the biodiversity, which they don't want to understand, but for drinking water. So what are the constraints? So water is utilized by many sectors: urban, energy, industry, agriculture. So whether we like it or not, we have to engage with those sectors. And those sectors work in silos. So this has been an enormous learning curve for us and an enormous challenge. There are many policies, a lot of legislation that is not, it's compartmentalized. And so, so you have local authorities, you have the Ministry of Lands, the Ministry of Environment, they're not talking to each other. So it's a major, major problem. And we have been working with government and local authorities and Parliament to try and getting everybody to speak to each other. So weak implementation is also a major issue. Compliance, lack of compliance. I think if I had to put this finger on one aspect that is absolutely detrimental, but it's not just to urban environments, but also in the larger landscape, in the rural areas, in the wildlife areas as well, is planning. Planning is a major issue. Fragmentation, not only in Harare, wetlands, ecologically sensitive areas, but in the rural areas, the fragmentation of sensitive areas is very bad. And the need to capacity build, to align the different departments, to speak to each other, to have sort of development hubs that are speaking to each other, because what we find that mostly they are working in silos. They don't talk to each other. So there's also ecological data that is lacking and knowledge. We are often told, "Oh, bring us the evidence," and so a lot of research is still necessary. We do a lot of bird monitoring in the different wetlands of the city, and also at an international level. So we have 2 Ramsar sites within the city and 2 just outside the city, and so that basically makes us a wetland city. And we've tried to get Harare applied to become a wetland city. As we know, Cape Town has recently applied and has been accepted as a wetland city, and so we haven't succeeded in that yet. So we have these 4 Ramsar sites that are not being looked after by government. So it's up to people on the ground, communities on the ground, to lobby and advocate for the protection of these Ramsar sites. So that's where we are today. So basically what we're doing is to improve, our goal is to improve the capacity of communities and local authorities of Harare Metropolitan to respond to climate change. So we in Zimbabwe are drying up. So desertification is in line. So in the next 10 years, if we don't look after our wetlands, desert is coming. And so the need to build resilience through improved management of this natural infrastructure, and thereby protect the biodiversity, the migratory species, and they are our indicators. So if we've still got the corn crakes coming, we know that we're winning. And so far, the corn crakes are still at Monavale, so we've still got something to save. So also strengthening institutional capacity of local authorities. Often they have no idea, there have been no training on environmental issues, and there is very little knowledge in local authorities and government agencies. There's a lot of political interference in Zimbabwe. We are going towards elections. We don't want to talk about politics. We are completely apolitical. However, it is a reality, the political and economical environment we are working in. So we have to be very aware of what is the environment that we're working in. And so we've been advocating for a long time for the gazetting of ecologically sensitive areas for Harare. That has actually just recently been done last week. And disappointingly, it's not strong enough because they've been gazetted as no-go areas. However, developers can appeal to either the Minister or the Environmental Management Agency and submit an EIA process. So for us, we've identified the environmental impact assessment process as totally flawed. There is insufficient stakeholder engagement. People are not being heard. So it's basically a tick boxing exercise. The environmental consultants that are often engaged by developers. So it's developers that are paying EIA consultants. The EIA consultants are substandard often. They often have relationships with the Environmental Management Agency that brings about corruption. So this is the reality on the ground. We're all seeing it on the ground, and so we're fighting it. So we have about 25 court cases in Harare to stop development on wetlands, and we engage very, very closely with government, appealing petitions, communities. Tomorrow, we're all piling in to a meeting organized by the Ministry of Environment for stakeholder engagement for the development of the National Environmental Action Plan for Zimbabwe. That has been on our Environmental Management Act, a provision of our Environmental Management Act for years, and it's never been it's never been done, and now they are doing it. So we are in there to make sure that it's done properly and not just tick boxing exercise. So the importance of community is key. So our constitution is very progressive. So we already have in our constitution the right to a safe and healthy environment. And it's really fantastic. So we're aligned to the United Nations resolution that was adopted last year, promoting the right to safe and healthy environment, which is key to saving the environment, saving biodiversity. So pushing environmental justice. In Zimbabwe, in Harare, we have cases of typhoid and cholera, which is, the issue of water and environmental degradation, so disease. So we are pushing hard for communities to come on board to understand the importance of the environment, the importance of wetlands for water, and the biodiversity. Why are birds important? Why is biodiversity important? Why are the insects important? So we've developed wetland management plans with communities and are looking for funding actually to roll them out. And we have initiated the restoration of wetland areas within the city as well, with much difficulty and much resistance, but also a lot of communities and residents coming on board to say, no, we want to save our wetlands. So if we are successful in Maree in saving our wetlands, it will be, and I have to say this, because of people have said, we want to save our biodiversity and we want to save our wetlands. And it will not be at this point in time because of laws and or government intervention. So on that sad note, but we are quite combative in Harare, so there is a lot to hope for. I'm going to just go through quickly some of the tools we've developed. So we've mapped the wetlands in Harare. We worked with government on the development of national guidelines. And basically, we're putting a lot of energy and young people and communities on the ground and to save our wetlands and our biodiversity and our migratory species in Harare and in Zimbabwe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Julia. I think it's not hard to see your passion and your drive and your keeping on fighting despite the many challenges you face, and I know there are many. And it's also really great to see, we often think of these big sites as being important for migratory birds, but the little sites close to home are just as important. So just a reminder to keep putting in questions. I see there are a couple in the Q&A and any chats. So Julia, somebody sending their regards to you. And I'm going to hand over to our last speaker. So thank you everyone for hanging on. Mpho is not going to be very long, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So Mpho, over to you. You can share your screen and take us away for our last presentation for the evening.
Thanks, Brandon. I hope everyone can see my screen. Let me just put it on slideshow. Good.
There we go. Very good to go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mpho Williart from BirdLife Botswana. Working here as a conservation officer and focusing on species monitoring. But before I give a short and quick talk on our bird population monitoring program, just a quick background on BirdLife Botswana. We are the only BirdLife international partner based in Botswana. We are membership based, and our mandate is to conserve birds as well as empower people as we conserve birds. And getting into it, the bird population monitoring program, or in short, the BPM program, was established in 2010 with support from the Royal Society for Protecting Birds. This program is a citizen science based, and involves citizens and resident volunteers in bird counts that are done twice a year, February and November. And the counts are done using the line transect sampling method, and monitoring is done in 2-kilometer transect that are chosen nationwide and monitored by these volunteers. The main reason for the establishment of the program was, realizing at the time the gap, knowledge gap that was there in Botswana in terms of bird knowledge, as well as monitoring data on our common bird species, particularly the terrestrial birds. So this particular program, something that I missed, is focused more on the terrestrial species as opposed to those that are found in the wetlands. So basically the aim was to develop a wild bird index for Botswana, showing the bird population trends over years, and using those trends to set conservation priorities to guide things like quotas for game birds, because before then, the quotas were given out by government, but there was no real data or monitoring data that was there to show populations or trends. We're also, aiming to use the data to contribute to, people that go to this international signatory bodies like CBD, and obviously to sort of cover up the gap in knowledge of birds by citizens. We were also looking to build capacity and bird identification, awareness, and literally get people to own up and be a part of bird conservation in Botswana. A bit of talk on the program itself, since it's established in 2010, and the first count coming in 2011. So we've been counting for more than for exactly a decade now. And someone might wonder how far the program might have grown and what we did achieve on the objective that we set at the start of the program. As of February 2021, at least 600 people have participated throughout the decade, and about 561 transacts have been monitored. Some of them continually, some of them were abandoned at some point. I think I'll get to that at some point. The bird count report have been produced annually, and some of the data has been used as planned to contribute to the Botswana State of Environmental Report that is done by the Department of Environment Affairs and reports to the CBD. The latest report being the one that was shared in 2020. I think they're working on another one for this year as well, and they will be using part of the data that comes from this program. We've had a peer-reviewed article by Simon from RSPB and Katie, who was the coordinator of this program before I took over early last year. That was published. I should have shared the link here, but it's readily available online for those that are interested in checking it out. In terms of growth and progress, we've done a lot of capacity building on bird knowledge. We've recruited a lot of people to be part of this program to make up that 600 that I just took on earlier on, and we did about 70 workshops to date that have so far engaged up to 5,000 community members, some of which were able to be a part of this program and actually contribute valuable data. We've developed, through data that we got from this program, a DVD with the intention of building capacity on bird identification through calls. So this DVD was produced and distributed mostly to participants, to sort of empower them and make them more competent when it comes to identifying birds through calls. We've also managed to secure funding to support this program throughout the years, and recent projects includes one from that was funded by the African Bird Club, with the aim of strengthening community participation and actually expanding the program in any way we found fit. We also got a slightly similar project that was funded by, that is funded by NetGeo, currently ongoing, where we are trying to build capacity on bird identification by bird calls. Participants are involved in collecting data, records of bird calls, and you know, with the intention of feeding them back and sort of investigating what they are missing out on that transact, which is in the form of bird calls. Because for the most part, we had realized that most of the participants were more competent with visual bird identification as opposed to through bird calls. And then a graph here, I don't know if it's clear enough, was sort of a simple graph to show what has been happening throughout the years in terms of mainly the blue line that is under the red line, to see if there's been an increase in the number of transacts that have been monitored throughout the years. But you know, unfortunately, it looks like they have been, you know, dropping throughout the years for a lot of reasons that I will share in a bit. From 2010, we sort of had a bit of an increase in the following counts, but then we had sort of a gradual drop in the participation throughout the years up to, I think I stopped at 2020 there, but 2020, 2021 is more of the same, sort of becoming constant now. And then here, I don't know if the maps will be visible enough, but the one on the left was the number of transacts that were, or the distribution of transacts that were monitored in 2011 in the first counts, most of them being around towns and the large villages, and most of them being out of protected areas, and only those that are in protected areas being monitored by the Department of Wildlife National Parks, who are also contributing to this program. And then the one on the right is the transacts that were monitored in November 2020, with obviously an obvious decrease in the number of transacts, as seen in the graph that I shared earlier on. Then coming to the challenges and shortcomings, which might explain a bit of what I shared earlier. From our perspective, looking at the data that comes in, we've seen that for the most part, the data quality has been, you know, poor to say, for lack of a better word. We've had challenges like misidentification of birds, low records in terms of, you know, someone recording maybe too few birds, you know, in an area where you know that there are a lot of species occurring. Mainly due to like lack of knowledge, you know, maybe just recording only the species that they could identify at the time of the count. And we've also had, unfortunately, challenges of, you know, made up counts. You know, some people deciding to share counts that were made up so that they sort of honor their participation on that particular accounting period. And of course, we've have a challenge of an evident challenge of low knowledge on bird calls, as mentioned earlier on. And of course, we have had you know, sort of feedback from participants sharing that they have, you know, a challenge of resources, from transport to going to transacts, binoculars, you know, bird books that they use to identify birds and all that. And we've also had inconsistent monitoring of transacts, due to this being a voluntary based program. Sometimes people don't, you know, they are not available to monitor it at any time. Maybe someone counts in February and they are not available due to personal reasons or commitments. So sometimes we do have gaps in terms of, monitoring throughout this month twice a year. So it's been a challenge, and some of the inconsistent monitoring has been due to, some participants losing motivation along the way. We've always tried to motivate them in a lot of ways, giving out merchandise and stuff, and doing a lot of feedback and, visits and, meetups and chats and all that. But it's still a challenge that is still persistent. So yeah, we do have a problem with, that inconsistency in terms of monitoring. What we've done to sort of support and keep up the program throughout this decade, this 10 years, we've done a lot of feedback workshops. We've done refresher workshops where we sort of refreshed our participants on the methodology, checking out on the problems that they face on the doing transact visits, actual transact visits, to appreciate where they're actually doing the monitoring. And as recent, in the past year, we did actually go out with some of the funding that we got from the project that I just mentioned earlier on, to do some refresher workshops where we engaged a bird expert who happens to be one of our board members, Mr. Chris Brewster, to help participants on a sort of face-to-face interaction, with challenges with identifying birds and all the other challenges that they faced during the count. So we did a few workshops that covered basically all the major districts in the country, and we strategically, sort of chose those that we could see or had evidence of, a bit of low knowledge on bird identification across the country, and engage them in this refresher workshops. We've also, sort of tried to support them through, this ongoing project where we were trying to have them record calls and, with intention to give them some sort of feedback on what they've done missing as calls, and, the kind of birds that they should expect that are calling in that transact that they're probably missing. And we've also tried, even though it's not enough, to procure and donate a few binoculars and a few books to participants. The picture on the right is one participant with a binocular, a bird book, and the DVD that I talked about earlier on, to sort of help them, be more competent in terms of identifying birds by calls. Before I end, I think the other challenge that we've had, or sort of shortcoming that I didn't include in the slides, was we haven't done a lot of analysis, sort of to make sense of the data, or make it, ideal to sort of put out the message out there, mainly because of, we've been understaffed for the most part, and sort of lack a bit of, technical skills in terms of analyzing the data. But the good news is we've been collecting the data, and will be continuing to collect the data, but we've been a bit, lagging in terms of analyzing it and putting out, meaningful reports out there. But the program is still ongoing. We will be doing our counts very soon in November. Participants are excited. Most of them are now devoted to this program, and actually even call before you actually call them to remind them. Yeah, basically that's all I'll share in short. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mpho. I think you've really shown this expansive project across your country, and how much hard work it takes to keep it going, and the real importance of having community members involved and invested. So any of you that are involved in citizen science projects, please continue. I'm hoping you can see from this last presentation just how valuable some of this data is. So I think I'm going to hand over back to our actual host for the evening, but just a huge thank you on behalf of myself to my fellow BirdLife team. I think you're doing a fantastic work, and it's an absolute pleasure working with you, and for taking the time out this evening to share with us.
Absolutely, Bron. A massive thank you to all our speakers this evening. You're all welcome to come back on screen if you're still with us. Much like our migratory birds do their marathon journey, tonight was a marathon showcase of the phenomenal work being done across the East Atlantic Flyway. It is just so inspiring seeing all of the different facets that are being put into action, from policy to on the ground conservation work. Keep it up, guys. It really, together we go a lot further, and a massive, massive congratulations to all of you that are part of the East Atlantic Flyway initiative. Because we've certainly run out of time, I'm not going to go through any questions this evening. I think we've certainly filled our hour-and-a-half slot, but I see there were a few typed answers in the Q&A box. So if you did ask a question, you can visit the Q&A box and your answer should be there. But if not, we can put you in touch with our speakers. If you need to get a hold of them, just contact us at conversations@birdlife.org.za, and we'll happily put you in touch with all of our speakers this evening. A reminder that next week we will be continuing on the journey of coastal seabirds. So we are going to have Dr. Tegan Carpenter-Kling in the house with us. She will be showcasing some of BirdLife South Africa's tracking work across the coastal seabirds in the Western Cape. A really, really exciting set of work. But once again, just a massive, massive thank you to all our speakers this evening for making the time to join us. And as I said, if you do have any questions, just pop them across to conversations@birdlife.org.za and we will pass those along. Thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. We will be back again next week, Tuesday. Look after yourselves, keep your eyes on the skies, keep enjoying those birds, and we will see you next week. Stay safe out there. Good night.